I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am, trying to make sense of everything that happened. Maybe if I explain it properly, people will understand that things aren't always as black and white as they seem. Todd and I met when we were both working part-time sales jobs. I was saving every penny for my master's degree, while he was pouring everything into building his business. Those early years were actually pretty good. We both had our goals, and we supported each other. Well, mostly I supported him. I'd listen to his business plans for hours, help him brainstorm marketing strategies, even proofread his proposals when I should have been studying. But that's what you do when you love someone, right? You sacrifice. We dated for almost 5 years before he finally proposed. 5 years of me putting my life on hold while he wasn't ready for the commitment of marriage, because his business needed his full attention. I'd bring up the future sometimes, hint about where we were heading, and he'd always have some excuse about timing or financial stability. Meanwhile, I'm working my way through graduate school, managing our household responsibilities, and basically being the perfect girlfriend while he gets to play entrepreneur. When I finally graduated with my master's, I put my foot down. I'd invested 5 years in this relationship, and I deserved some security. I wasn't getting any younger, and I'd already sacrificed my early 20s for his dreams. Todd finally came around and proposed, probably because he realized what a good thing he had. I mean, how many women would stick around for 5 years while their boyfriend figured himself out? The first few years of marriage were challenging, but manageable. I decided to pursue my PhD, something I'd always wanted to do but had delayed because Todd needed so much support with his business ventures. He was still completely obsessed with work, spending 12-hour days at the office and coming home exhausted. I ended up managing most of the household stuff while juggling my doctoral program, but I told myself it was temporary. Once his business stabilized and I finished school, we'd have a more balanced partnership. Todd had this annoying Sunday routine, where he'd spend hours doing maintenance around the house. He'd act like he was doing me some huge favor by cleaning gutters and checking the sprinkler system, but honestly, it felt more like he was avoiding spending quality time together. Sure, he'd plan these monthly date nights and quarterly vacations, but they always felt obligatory, like items on his to-do list rather than genuine romantic gestures. I finished my PhD after 3 years of incredibly hard work. I was proud of myself. Not many people have the discipline to complete a doctoral program while essentially running a household single-handedly. But instead of jumping straight into a demanding career, I decided to take some time to explore my options. I did volunteer research work, which was fulfilling and gave me flexibility. Todd seemed to assume I was building toward something bigger. But honestly, after years of non-stop studying and managing everything at home, I deserved a break. Around our 4th year of marriage, we started trying for a baby. I was getting older, and we both knew that if we wanted children, we needed to start soon. But month after month, nothing happened. The fertility struggles were devastating. Here I was, having done everything right, gotten my education, married a stable man, waited until we were financially secure, and my body wasn't cooperating. We went to therapy to deal with the stress of trying to conceive. The counselor suggested that maybe I should consider focusing on my career while we worked through the fertility issues. It made sense. I needed something fulfilling in my life, besides the endless cycle of hoping and disappointment. Todd was actually supportive of this idea and helped me find a position at a research company. I was grateful for his help, even though part of me resented that his connections were necessary for me to get the job. Starting work again after so many years was intimidating, but I quickly found my rhythm. My colleagues were impressed with my research background, and I felt intellectually stimulated in a way I hadn't experienced in years. One colleague in particular, Adrian, seemed to really appreciate my expertise. He was about 10 years younger than me, brilliant, and actually listened when I talked about my work. It was refreshing to have conversations that didn't revolve around Todd's business problems or household logistics. Adrian and I started having coffee after work sometimes, discussing research methodologies and industry trends. It was completely professional, but I found myself looking forward to these conversations more than I probably should have. He had this way of making me feel valued and intelligent, like my opinions actually mattered. When I'd try to have similar discussions with Todd, he'd nod politely, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere, probably calculating profit margins or planning his next business move. Over time, I realized how much I'd been missing in my marriage. Todd and I had fallen into this routine where we functioned more like roommates than partners. He'd come home from work, we'd eat dinner while discussing practical matters, maybe watch some television, then go to bed. The spark that had once existed between us seemed to have disappeared somewhere between his business obsessions and my academic pursuits. My friendship with Adrian started to fill that emotional void. He'd text me funny observations about our workplace, remember details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier, and genuinely seem interested in my thoughts and feelings. When I mentioned how isolated I sometimes felt, he understood in a way Todd never seemed to. Adrian had been through a difficult breakup recently and knew what it was like to feel disconnected from someone you'd once been close to. I started spending more time on my phone, texting with Adrian and other colleagues. It felt good to have a social circle outside of Todd's business associates and our couple friends. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my own identity, separate from being Todd's wife. But instead of being happy about my newfound confidence, Todd became suspicious and controlling. He started asking questions about who I was texting, why I was always on my phone, whether I was making new friends at work. The interrogation was insulting and frankly hypocritical, coming from someone who'd spent years prioritizing his business relationships over our marriage. When I'd try to explain that I was just enjoying having colleagues and professional connections, he'd get this wounded look like I was betraying him somehow. "Kelly, why are you always on your phone now? You never used to be like this," he'd say. Standing there with his arms crossed, like he was my father instead of my husband. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. "This is how you've been for the last 8 years, Todd. Maybe you're just finally noticing because you're not buried in spreadsheets for once." The truth was, I was tired of having to justify my friendships and social life to someone who'd never shown the same consideration for my feelings. All those years of him working late, missing dinners, canceling plans because of business emergencies, but now suddenly he was concerned about my availability and attention. My relationship with Adrian gradually evolved beyond professional discussions. We'd talk about our personal lives, our disappointments, our dreams for the future. He confided in me about his struggles with his ex-girlfriend, how she'd never really supported his career goals. I shared some of my frustrations about feeling unappreciated in my marriage, how Todd seemed to take everything I did for granted. Adrian made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When we talked, I felt like the interesting, intelligent woman I used to be before I got lost in the role of supportive wife. He'd compliment my insights, seek out my opinions, and actually remember things I'd told him. It was intoxicating to feel that valued and seen. I knew our friendship was becoming something more, but I justified it by telling myself that I deserved to feel appreciated. After 8 years of putting Todd's needs first, sacrificing my career timeline for his business goals, and managing our household while he pursued his ambitions, wasn't I entitled to some happiness? Adrian wasn't just some random guy. He was intelligent, accomplished, and genuinely cared about me as a person. When Adrian and I finally kissed after a particularly emotional conversation about our respective relationships, it felt like waking up from a long sleep. The passion and connection I'd been missing for years suddenly flooded back. This wasn't just physical attraction. It was emotional intimacy with someone who truly understood and valued me. I started planning how to transition out of my marriage. Todd and I had grown so far apart that I honestly believed he'd be relieved to end things. We barely communicated beyond logistics, rarely showed physical affection, and seemed to be going through the motions of married life without any real connection. I thought I was doing both of us a favor by ending a relationship that had clearly run its course. My plan was to surprise Todd with divorce papers on our anniversary. It seemed poetic somehow, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, on the same date we'd promised to love each other forever. I consulted with a lawyer about asset division and was confident I'd receive a fair settlement, given my contributions to our household and the sacrifices I'd made for Todd's career success. But Todd started becoming increasingly suspicious and confrontational about my behavior. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about my phone usage, question my work schedule, and generally create this atmosphere of tension and mistrust in our house. Instead of having an honest conversation about the problems in our marriage, he chose to become controlling and paranoid. Not so easily, honey. I'd tell him when he'd demand to see my phone or interrogate me about my whereabouts. His jealousy and possessiveness were exactly the kind of behavior that had driven me away in the first place. If he'd spent half as much energy on our relationship over the years as he was spending on monitoring my activities, maybe we wouldn't have ended up in this situation. The more pressure Todd applied, the more I pulled away. I'd give him just enough attention to keep him from completely losing it, but my heart wasn't in our marriage anymore. How could it be when I'd found someone who actually appreciated me and made me feel like the woman I was meant to be? Adrian and I talked about our future together. He was ready to leave his current position and start fresh somewhere new. We fantasized about moving to a different city, where we could both pursue better career opportunities without the complications of our current situations. He made me feel young and hopeful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Looking back, maybe I should have been more direct with Todd about wanting a divorce instead of planning the anniversary surprise. But honestly, given his controlling behavior and tendency to make everything about his business concerns, I didn't think he'd handle the conversation maturely. I thought a clean break would be better for both of us. What I didn't expect was for Todd to completely lose his mind and turn vindictive. Apparently, he'd hired some private investigator to spy on me like I was a criminal instead of his wife who was unhappy in their marriage. The violation of privacy was stunning, but typical of his controlling personality. The night of my company's quarterly party, I was looking forward to celebrating some recent project successes with my colleagues. Todd rarely attended these work functions, so I was surprised when he showed up. But instead of supporting me professionally, he decided to humiliate me in front of everyone I worked with. "Happy anniversary, baby," he announced loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "You were planning a surprise for me on our anniversary. I gave you one before it." Then he handed me divorce papers in front of my boss, my colleagues, and Adrian. The mortification was complete. He even had the audacity to raise a toast to the new couple in town and called Adrian a loser son of a wolf, like some kind of deranged person. The whole scene was psychotic and abusive. You don't ambush someone at their workplace, destroy their professional reputation, and humiliate them publicly because you're upset about marital problems. But that's exactly what Todd did, and somehow I became the villain in the story. The aftermath was swift and devastating. My company suspended both Adrian and me, pending an investigation into our relationship. Despite the fact that we'd never done anything inappropriate at work and had maintained complete professionalism in the office, the public scene Todd created made it impossible for either of us to continue in our positions. Within a week, both Adrian and I were terminated. 8 years of marriage, and Todd destroyed my career and reputation because he couldn't handle the fact that I'd found happiness with someone else. The man I'd supported through his business struggles, whose household I'd managed while pursuing my own education, whose dreams I'd prioritized over my own for nearly a decade. This was how he chose to repay my loyalty and sacrifice. During the divorce proceedings, Todd's vindictive nature became even more apparent. Despite my significant contributions to our household and the career sacrifices I'd made to support his business success, he fought me on every aspect of the settlement. His lawyer painted me as some kind of gold digger, completely ignoring the years I'd spent managing our home while he built his company. The most humiliating part was when Todd showed up at Adrian's apartment with audio recordings of private conversations between us. Apparently, his private investigator had been recording us without our knowledge, which seems illegal, but somehow was allowed in court. Todd played recordings where Adrian and I discussed our relationship, including private, intimate details that should never have been shared with anyone else. Adrian was devastated by the invasion of privacy and the destruction of his career. The stress of the situation, combined with the financial uncertainty of both of us being unemployed, put enormous strain on our relationship. What had been a beautiful connection based on mutual respect and understanding became complicated by practical concerns about survival and rebuilding our professional lives. The final divorce settlement was nothing like what I'd expected. Despite my lawyer's arguments about my contributions to the marriage and the sacrifices I'd made, the judge awarded me only 6 months of minimal alimony. Todd kept the house, most of our assets, and basically everything we'd built together over 13 years of relationship. I felt completely betrayed by the legal system and by Todd's willingness to destroy me financially and professionally. This was a man I'd loved and supported for over a decade, and he was treating me like an enemy who deserved to be punished, rather than a partner who'd simply grown apart from him. The worst part was watching Adrian gradually distance himself from me as the reality of our situation became clear. He'd expected that I'd receive a substantial settlement that would give us financial stability while we rebuilt our careers. When it became obvious that I'd be struggling financially and professionally for the foreseeable future, his commitment to our relationship began to waver. Within a few months of the divorce being finalized, Adrian ended our relationship. He claimed it was because of the stress and complications, but I knew the truth. He'd been attracted to the idea of being with an established, financially secure woman, not someone who was starting over with nothing at 39 years old. So here I am, a year and a half later, trying to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I'm working again, but in a position far below my qualifications, because my professional reputation was destroyed by Todd's public humiliation campaign. I'm living in a small apartment instead of the home I helped create and maintain for 8 years. And I'm alone, having lost both my marriage and the relationship I'd hoped would replace it. People who hear this story often act like I'm some kind of villain, but they don't understand the full context. They don't know about the years of emotional neglect, the way Todd prioritized his business over our relationship, or how isolated and unappreciated I felt in our marriage. They just see the affair and assume I'm a terrible person who destroyed a good marriage for selfish reasons. The truth is much more complicated. I was a woman who'd given the best years of her life to a man who took her for granted, who'd sacrificed her own career timeline and personal goals to support his dreams, and who'd finally found someone who made her feel valued and alive again. Yes, I handled the situation imperfectly, but I was trying to find happiness after years of feeling invisible in my own marriage. Todd's reaction was completely disproportionate and vindictive. Instead of recognizing his role in our marital problems or trying to understand why I'd become so unhappy, he chose to destroy my life as thoroughly as possible. The private investigator, the public humiliation, the legal warfare, all of it was designed to punish me for daring to want something better than the emotionally barren marriage we'd settled into. I understand that infidelity hurts, but Todd's response revealed a cruel and controlling side of his personality that I'd never fully recognized during our marriage. The man who'd seemed merely neglectful and work-obsessed turned out to be capable of calculated cruelty when his ego was threatened. Adrian's abandonment was equally devastating, but perhaps more predictable. Men often lose interest when women become inconvenient or complicated, and my situation certainly became both of those things quickly. What I'd thought was genuine love and connection turned out to be largely based on circumstances that disappeared when Todd's revenge campaign succeeded. Now I'm trying to rebuild not just my career and financial stability, but my faith in relationships and my ability to trust my own judgment. The whole experience has taught me that people aren't always who they seem to be, and that even long-term relationships can dissolve into bitter warfare when egos and money are involved. I've learned to be more self-reliant and less willing to sacrifice my own goals for someone else's dreams. If I ever get involved in a serious relationship again, it will be as an equal partner, not as a supportive background character in someone else's success story. The hardest part is knowing that Todd is apparently happier than ever, according to mutual friends, while I'm still struggling to get back on my feet. His business continues to thrive. He kept our beautiful house, and he's probably telling everyone who will listen about how he escaped from his terrible, cheating wife. Meanwhile, I'm working to rebuild everything I lost when I tried to find happiness outside of our failing marriage. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. If I'd demanded counseling, insisted on honest conversations about our problems, or simply filed for divorce before getting involved with Adrian. But I can't change the past, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life apologizing for wanting to feel loved and appreciated. What happened between Todd and me was the result of years of growing apart, poor communication, and incompatible priorities. The affair was a symptom of deeper problems, not the cause of our marriage's failure. His vindictive response revealed who he really was underneath the facade of the successful, stable husband. I may have lost everything in the short term, but I've gained clarity about what I want and need in a relationship. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, capable of surviving even when everything falls apart simultaneously. And I've learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones most willing to destroy you when things don't go their way. The story isn't over yet. I'm still relatively young, educated, and capable of building a good life for myself. Todd may have won this battle through superior legal strategy and willingness to fight dirty, but that doesn't mean he was right, or that I deserve the scorched earth treatment he gave me. I'm focused now on my own healing and growth, on rebuilding my career and financial independence, and on learning to trust my instincts about people and relationships. The experience was brutal, but it's taught me valuable lessons about resilience, self-advocacy, and the importance of maintaining my own identity within a partnership. Someday I hope to find someone who appreciates me for who I am, who values partnership over control, and who understands that love requires ongoing effort and attention from both people. Until then, I'm learning to be content with my own company and proud of how far I've come despite everything that was taken from me.